major points. Wrist and hand, like the main wrist flexors and extensors you should know. So on the ulnar side, you have for the flexors, flexor carpi ulnaris here, then flexor carpi radialis. They do flexion with ulnar deviation and radial deviation respectively. For the extensors, you have your extensor carpi ulnaris back here. That's going to do extension with ulnar deviation, and then for extensor carpi radialis, that's a little unique because you have extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. They have the same action at the wrist where they both extend and radially deviate the wrist. Extensor carpi radialis longus is going to have a little bit more of an elbow flexion role because it inserts further up the humerus, or excuse me, it originates further up the humerus. Another thing to note that's kind of helpful with those two muscles is that the extensor carpi radialis brevis originates on the lateral epicondyle of the humerus up here, along with several other tendons from the common extensor tendon, and then the extensor carpi radialis longus inserts a little bit further up the humerus, so it's separate from those other muscles. And then just proximal to that, you have the origin of the brachioradialis, which does not cross the wrist, so we're not going to talk about it anymore, but I just think it's helpful to be able to visualize the relationships of the origins of those muscles. So those are your major wrist muscles. Also at the wrist, you have your anatomic snuff box, so that's the thumb muscles. So let's see if we can see this here. Snuff box, I mean, if you can't see my fingers, you can look up a picture or something, but as a refresher, I mean, anatomic snuff box, you've got your abductor pollicis longus down here, then extensor pollicis brevis right on top of that, then you have your snuff box, and then at the top of the snuff box here is going to be your extensor pollicis longus. So it's useful to know how to palpate those. The other big thing is with the finger flexors and extensors, remember that most of the finger flexors and most of the finger extensors, in addition to flexing and extending the fingers, they also cross the wrist joint. So the finger flexors are going to flex the fingers but also flex the wrist. Most of the finger extensors are going to extend the fingers and also extend the wrist. So what this means is that if like let's say I'm in neutral here, like my finger flexors can work kind of normally, I guess. Whereas if I extend the wrist like this, that puts some tension in the finger flexors. So from here, it's going to, the passive tension in these finger flexors is going to cause my fingers to kind of curl in like this. And it's going to be really hard to open up my hand because the finger flexors are lengthened across this extended wrist joint here. Same deal if I flex my wrist like this. Now the finger extensors are really stretched across the back of the wrist, so it's going to be hard for me to close my hand, and my fingers are going to want to straighten out like this because of the passive tension in the finger extensors as they're stretched across the wrist joint. Where this can be important is with people with paralysis of certain muscles. So that's what we referred to as tenodesis before. So, for example, if they have paralysis in certain muscles, if they want to open up their hand but they can't actually use their finger extensors, what they can do is kind of flex their wrist like this, and that's going to stretch the finger extensors across the back of the wrist, and that passive tension in the finger extensors is going to open up those fingers and allow them to get their hand around something. And then when they want to close their fingers or flex their fingers, what they can do is extend their wrist, so use the wrist extensors, and that's going to stretch the finger flexors across the front of the wrist and cause the fingers to flex. So that's the way that they can kind of extend the fingers and flex the fingers, even if they don't have full use of the finger flexor and extensor muscles. I think the last big thing for wrist and hand would be just the innervations, because wrist and hand is a common site of nerve damage that you might see. So ulnar nerve is going to be median nerve is going to be most of the wrist flexor and pronator muscles. Radial nerve is going to be most of the wrist extensor muscles, and then ulnar nerve gets a couple of the wrist flexor muscles. Off the top of my head, it's just the flexor carpi ulnaris, the medial two heads of the flexor digitorum profundus, maybe a couple other things, and then median nerve also gets the thenar muscles, ulnar nerve gets the hypothenar muscles, and yeah, a little bit more detail than that, but those are the main things. So hopefully that's helpful. It's just a refresher of everything. You don't need to grasp it all on the first try, but I think sometimes it's just helpful to get a refresher of what we went over and what main points you should focus on when you're studying. Yeah,